The first sign my marriage was in trouble was a coffee mug sliding under my bedroom door at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning. Not a thrown mug, not a dramatic scene. Just the base of it scraping the wood, then tipping sideways on the other end, so cold coffee bled into the rug beside my chair while I sat on a video call, pretending nothing unusual was happening. I was presenting quarterly numbers to a client in Denver when it happened. My camera was on, my screen was shared. I had one headphone half on, one half off, because our internet had been unstable all week and I was trying to catch every word in case the audio clipped. Then the mug came under the door. A second later, Luke knocked once and called, not even quietly. "Are you almost done in there?" One of the men on the call paused in the middle of a sentence. I watched his face freeze into that polite office expression people use when they accidentally witness something too personal. I clicked mute. I stared at the door. Then I said, as evenly as I could, "I'm working." He answered, "I know, but I need my charger. Also, Nate wants to know if we still have that extension cord." Nate was his cousin. Nate had been staying with us for 11 weeks. I remember the exact number because after week 6, I started counting in a way I had not wanted to admit even to myself. At first it had sounded temporary, almost noble. Nate had accepted a job in another state, but the start date got pushed. His lease had ended. He didn't want to sign a whole new contract in the city he was leaving. Could he stay with us for a little while the paperwork cleared? A little while. That phrase should come with warning labels. I said yes before Luke finished asking. Not because I am a saint, because at the time, it felt easy. Nate was family. We had a guest room. I worked from home, but figured I could take calls from the dining table for a week or two if needed. Luke still had his operations job then and was gone most weekdays. We told ourselves it would barely disturb anything. Then the start date moved again. Then Nate started doing contract work remotely from the guest room because he needed a quiet setup. Then Luke got laid off. Then somehow, the man who paid none of our mortgage and the man who no longer had a job both became fixed pieces of the house during business hours, while I became the one expected to float around them. At first, I tried to be gracious about it. I took my laptop to the kitchen island. Then the blender happened during a budget review. I moved to the dining room. Then Nate started taking sales calls 10 feet away because the guest room felt stale. I tried the back patio until the construction next door began. I spent 2 days working off a folding tray in the hallway outside our bedroom like I was waiting for a train that never came. Luke kept saying, "We're making it work." That phrase irritated me more each time he used it. Because by we, he meant me. And by making it work, he meant I kept absorbing whatever new inconvenience landed in the house so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. The bedroom setup was supposed to be temporary too. My company had hinted that if home distractions kept affecting calls, they would require a documented, dedicated workspace for remote staff. Not a kitchen stool. Not a shared table. A real room with a closing door. So one Sunday afternoon, I dragged a spare desk into our bedroom, angled it toward the far wall, and ran an Ethernet cable under the dresser. I told Luke as gently as I knew how that I needed uninterrupted hours during the day. If he needed clothes, shoes, a phone charger, whatever, he could grab them before 9, at lunch, or after I logged off. He acted as if I were asking him to move into the garage. "You want me on a schedule to enter my own bedroom," he said. I said I want one room where I can keep my job. He laughed then, but not because anything was funny, more because he had not yet realized I was serious. Luke had that habit. When he disliked reality, he treated it like a draft someone else could revise. The first week, he pushed back in tiny ways. He forgot a belt. He forgot his watch. He forgot the good phone charger, the one with the long cord. He forgot his gym shorts. Every time, the knock would come while I was in the middle of something. Never catastrophic, never explosive. Just constant enough that my shoulders stayed lifted all day, waiting for the next interruption. And each time, if I looked frustrated, he would do the same little shrug. "Babe, I live here," as if I didn't. That was the part one could not explain to anyone without sounding dramatic. I started feeling like a trespasser in the house I paid most of the bills for. Not because Luke said it outright. Because everything in the daily rhythm implied it. Nate got the proper desk. Luke got the living room, the kitchen, the TV, the mid-afternoon naps, the freedom to drift room to room without thinking. I got a quarter of my own bedroom and the burden of apologizing whenever I needed silence. People think resentment arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like dust. Quiet. Repeating. Coding everything until one day you touch your own life and realize none of it feels clean anymore. After the coffee mug incident, my boss messaged me privately. Just one sentence. Everything okay on your end? That question made me want to cry more than anything Luke had done that morning. Not because it was cruel. Because it was professional. Measured. The kind of sentence someone writes when they are giving you the chance to save face before they decide whether you are still reliable. I typed back, temporary home interruption. Won't happen again. Then I stared at my own words. Won't happen again. As if I had any authority left to promise that. At lunch, I came out to find Luke and Nate making grilled cheese in the kitchen. The mood was light. Almost cheerful. Luke was explaining some podcast theory about sleep cycles. Nate was laughing. My spilled coffee mug was rinsed and upside down in the drying rack like an object with no history. Luke looked up and said, "You're finally free." Free. Like I had been using the room for a hobby. I asked if we could talk. He saw my face and sighed before I even said anything. The way people do when they want credit for being tired of a problem they are still actively creating. We stepped onto the back porch. The screen door clicked shut behind us. I said, "You cannot interrupt me like that when I'm in meetings." He crossed his arms. I knocked. "You slid a mug under the door while I was presenting." It was an accident. No, the spill was an accident. Interrupting me was a choice. He looked offended then, genuinely offended, which almost made me doubt myself. Luke was good at that, not in a manipulative mastermind way. In a casual, deeply practiced way. He could react to your boundary like your tone had become the central moral issue. He said, "I needed my charger. I didn't think you'd make such a huge thing out of it." That phrase again. Huge thing. As if the scale of my reaction was the problem, not the scale of the entitlement that caused it. I told him my boss had messaged me. I told him I was the only one currently bringing in a paycheck. I told him the dedicated room wasn't a preference anymore. It was the difference between looking employable and looking chaotic. He said, "So now I'm not allowed in my own room because you have a corporate call." I remember looking at him and realizing he still believed the story was about ownership. Whose room? Whose inconvenience? Whose rights? He did not understand that I had already surrendered so much ground that this one closed door was the last visible sign that my work mattered at all. I said no. "You're not allowed to treat my job like background noise." That landed. Not because he agreed. Because he had no quick joke for it. He muttered something about me being intense and went back inside. That afternoon, he did stay out. So did Nate. For 6 whole hours, the house was finally quiet enough for me to hear my own thoughts again. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt ashamed that relief had to come from being sealed off from my own marriage. That night, after dinner, Nate thanked me for letting him crash with us a little longer. He said he appreciated how flexible I'd been. Flexible? Another pretty word for disappearing gracefully. I smiled and said it was fine. Then I washed dishes so hard I chipped one of our white salad plates against the sink. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening. Luke was getting dressed in the dark. For one foolish second, I thought maybe he had a job interview. Instead, he said, "Don't forget, Nate has a call at 11, so if your meeting's loud, maybe use headphones." I sat up in bed and looked at him. The room was still blue with early light. "Use headphones?" I repeated. He said, "Yeah, because he needs the guest room quiet." That was the exact moment something in me went still. Not angry, not frantic, clear. Because there it was, finally stated without decoration. The guest room was his workspace. The bedroom was mine only on sufferance. My professional life was expected to adjust around the comfort of the 2 men without paychecks. I said, "No," he blinked. "Excuse me?" "No." I said again, "Nate is in the guest room because we are helping him. I am in this bedroom because both of you pushed me out of every other place in the house. I will not whisper in my own job so he can feel settled in our spare room. Luke stared at me like I had become someone unrecognizable overnight. Maybe I had. Maybe women change quickest at the exact moment they stop editing obvious truths into softer shapes. He said, "Why are you making this into a competition?" I almost laughed, because men who are winning from default comfort always think naming the imbalance is what creates the conflict. I told him it wasn't a competition, it was arithmetic. One mortgage, one health insurance policy through my employer, one grocery budget that suddenly stretched over 3 adults. One person still waking up every day to protect all of it. Then I asked him a question I should have asked weeks earlier. Why am I the only one in this house acting like my job is real? He didn't answer. He left the room, and for the first time in a month, I locked the door behind him. The lock was old and a little sticky. It made a click louder than it should have. I stood with my hands still on it, heart pounding, as if I had done something violent instead of something embarrassingly small. I locked a bedroom door in my own house on a Wednesday morning and felt like a criminal. That alone should have told me everything. Around noon, my phone lit up with messages from my younger sister. Luke had texted her. Apparently, he wanted someone to tell me I was being unreasonable. Instead, she called me during my break and said, "Wait, you're the only one working, and he's upset because you need a closed door?" I said yes. Then I gave the short version. Not even the full version. I was too tired to make a case. She was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then she said, "Emma, this is not about a room." Sometimes another person says one sentence, and the entire structure of a problem becomes visible. She asked how long Nate had been there. I told her. She asked whether Luke had set any move-out date. I told her not really, just vague talk about once things settle. She asked whether Luke had taken over handling groceries, laundry, job applications, anything that would make this feel temporary and cooperative. I told her no. He was trying here and there, but mostly floating, thinking, recovering, researching, existing in that shapeless way men sometimes call stress, while women quietly continue the logistics underneath it. She said, very calmly, "You're subsidizing 2 men and being told not to make noise." I sat on the edge of the bed with that sentence in my lap. Subsidizing. Such an ugly, useful word. Not dramatic, not poetic. Precise. That evening, I did something I had been avoiding because I knew it would make the situation feel real. I opened our budgeting spreadsheet. Luke hated that spreadsheet. He said it made life feel like a company. I thought that was easy for him to say, since the spreadsheet was what kept the company from collapsing. I added up the extra groceries since Nate moved in, the utility increase, the parking tickets Luke had forgotten to dispute after being home all day, the money we spent buying a second monitor for Nate because he claimed he'd only need it for a few days, the ergonomic chair he borrowed from my office corner and never returned, the takeout meals that multiplied whenever I worked late because everyone assumed I'd be too tired to cook but no one else planned ahead. It wasn't ruinous. That was what made it worse. The amount was survivable, just large enough to normalize, just small enough that if I objected, I could be made to sound stingy instead of exhausted. When Luke came upstairs, I turned the laptop toward him. He glanced at the numbers and immediately looked wary. "Seriously?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Seriously." I told him Nate needed a firm move-out date by the weekend. I told him the guest room had to become my office again within 7 days. I told him if he needed things from the bedroom during work hours, he could do what any adult sharing space with a remote worker does. Plan ahead. And I told him I was done acting grateful for arrangements that only functioned because I kept shrinking inside them. He said I was humiliating him. That was almost enough to derail me, because humiliation is one of those words decent women are trained to fear causing. But then I looked at the spreadsheet, at the weeks of tiny adjustments and private compromises that had never once been named as humiliations when they happened to me. So I said, no, I'm describing the situation. If it feels humiliating, maybe that's information. He stared at me for a long time. Then he asked, quietly this time, "You'd really kick Nate out over this?" And that was when I understood he still thought the issue was the single fight. The mug, the lock, the tone, the room. He still did not understand that people almost never reach a final boundary because of one moment. They reach it because one moment reveals the shape of every previous one. I said, I would stop letting this house reorganize itself around everyone except me. He didn't sleep much that night. Neither did I. I heard him pacing once around 2 in the morning. At 3:30, he opened the bedroom door halfway, then closed it again when he saw I was awake. By 6, I knew whatever happened next would matter more than the argument itself. The next afternoon, Nate knocked while I was off camera and asked if we could talk. He looked embarrassed before he even started. He said Luke had finally explained the tension and that he hadn't realized how much the setup had affected my work. Then he said something I'll probably remember longer than I remember anything Luke said that week. He said, I should have noticed sooner that the person adjusting the most was the person with the least room, too. That was it. That was the whole truth. Not just of the guest situation. Of the marriage at that moment. Nate moved out 4 days later and stayed with an old college friend until his relocation date came through. He apologized twice, returned the monitor, and left a thank you card on the kitchen counter with a grocery gift card tucked inside. He did more to restore my sense of being seen in one afternoon than Luke had done in the previous month. Luke, to his credit, finally admitted he had treated my work like a utility. Something that was always there, always humming, always paying for things, and therefore easy to stop noticing. He said losing his job had made him feel small, and that somewhere in the middle of that, he had started resenting the structure of my day because it reminded him I still had one. I appreciated the honesty. I also hated that it arrived only after I locked a door, opened a spreadsheet, and made the future expensive enough to take seriously. We are still together, which I know is not the ending some people want when they hear a story like this, but staying together was not the same as pretending it had been minor. We ended up in counseling 3 weeks later, and one of the first things the therapist asked us was, when did the house stop behaving like it belonged equally to both of you? I nearly laughed when she said it, because for months, I had been trying to explain the problem through incidents. The blender, the knock, the charger, the mug, the lock. But the real injury had been territorial in a quieter sense. Not who legally owned a room, who got to occupy the mental center of the household, without question. That had been Luke for so long he could not even see it. Now, when I think back to that Tuesday, I don't actually remember the client call first. I remember kneeling on the carpet after it ended, blotting coffee with an old hand towel while sunlight hit the spill in a gold stripe through the blinds. I remember feeling stupid for how close I was to tears over something so small. And I remember, very clearly, the thought that came next. If a closed door is the only way I can get people to understand I am a person in this house too, then the problem is not the door. It's everyone who kept expecting it to stay open.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.